Okay, now the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, Numsa, has thrown its weight behind the ongoing public service strike. Yesterday, the Labour Court granted an interdict ordering essential workers to return to work, but non-essential workers are continuing with the public service strike, as we've reported today. Now, members who are affiliated to Nehawu are not backing down on their demand for a 10% salary increase. Well, to tell us more why Numsa is in solidarity with the public service strike is the spokesperson for Numsa, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. Phakamile, good afternoon. Welcome to today. Thanks for coming into studio. I haven't interviewed you in studio in the longest of times, pre-COVID days, but thanks for making time to come through this afternoon. Why is Numsa in solidarity? Let's start there first with the strike.
Good afternoon, Bradan, and thank you so much for having us on the show. As Numsa, we stand in solidarity with all striking workers in the public sector. We support the demands made by Nehawu and all other trade unions that have embarked on the strike. We believe that it's about time that this government did the right thing and honored the principles of centralized bargaining and paid workers what they deserve. And so we fully understand why they felt it was necessary for them to embark on a strike. Even though some of them are deemed essential, we understand the kind of provocation that led to them taking that drastic action. And we believe that it is government that must take full responsibility for any of the fallout of the strike.
Are you saying the government provoked the workers to behave in this manner?
Absolutely they did. Let's not forget that before we got here, Bradan, there was a 3-year wage agreement, which this government reneged on in the last year. In the last year of that wage agreement, in 2020, workers got 0%. And by the way, that was the same year when we heard about that shocking scandal of 13 billion rand or more, which was looted from through PPEs. So whilst health workers were denied essential protection of PPE, you had government officials that were looting state coffers at that time and then denying workers and giving them a 0%.
And reneging on an agreement.
Is that
why in your statement, strongly worded statement, you are accusing the government of being extremely arrogant?
Absolutely arrogant. They provoked the strike. Not only did they renege on the last leg of the agreement, they had the audacity to then impose a 3% without getting a mandate from all the unions. So it just shows you that this is a government that has no respect for workers, that doesn't even care about their conditions. Just now, you were talking to Usli about what's happening at Rahima Musa. These are issues that have been in the public domain for years, that workers have raised for years. But this government has turned a deaf ear to the complaints made by health workers. So, I mean, it's only natural that the response would be what it was with this shutdown that Nehawu spearheaded.
Yeah, and Nehawu spearheaded this in a way that's been criticized and condemned in other quarters, including from their own sister union, SATU, last week, saying that they were being intimidated by their fellow or sister union members of Nehawu to join the strike. And there's been these allegations of intimidation and violence everywhere. What's your view on Numsa about strikes getting violent?
First of all, we wouldn't be here if the state had adhered to the basic principles of collective bargaining. If that had happened, there would have been no strike. And I think this is this is at the heart of our problems in this country. We've got a government that just doesn't care. And the only time you get a response from them is when people get angry and start burning things. This is not how we should operate. But unfortunately, they push people into that space. Secondly, I think, first of all, as a union, we do not condone violence because we're a law-abiding trade union. But on the issues of whether workers in the public sector, and specifically essential workers, whether they should have gone on strike, absolutely they should have gone on strike.
But the law has a limit on that. I mean,
yes,
if you're in essential service, Phakamile, the Labour Relations Act, from what I understand, you can enlighten us further, says that if you're in essential service, you can't just go on full-blown strike just like that. There are limitations.
There are limitations. And there are limitations on essential workers. But our constitution says that everybody has the right to strike. And what do you do when the employer disregards collective bargaining? What are your avenues as Labour? This is the same challenge that we were faced with last year during the ESCOM wage talks, where the employer was very arrogant. Andre de Ruyter walked out, in fact, wasn't even present during wage negotiations, and then eventually imposed an increase. And of course, that sparked disruptions at various power plants, and workers reacted angrily. It is irresponsible of any employer to undermine collective bargaining to the extent where they provoke workers into embarking on an unprotected strike. So in this case, all responsibilities should be hung on the heads of those in the Collective Bargaining Council, in the Public Sector Bargaining Council, for failing to ensure and to protect the public from a full-blown strike.
And in your view as Numsa, that's government?
That's government.
So how do you think this will play out now? I mean, you, as a trade union, we understand. Yesterday I interviewed Mr. Sapete, the General Secretary of Nehawu. He's saying that they're going back to negotiations, but they don't know where those will go. They're still demanding the 10%.
Well, obviously, going back to negotiations is a good thing because you want to resolve the strike. You don't want to be in this sort of limbo situation where the strike is continuing and there's an interruption of services. You must remember that a strike by its very nature is disruptive, which is why all parties in centralized bargaining... But it shouldn't be violent. No, but let me just explain. This is why all parties in centralized bargaining should do everything in their power to prevent it. And if you have negotiated in good faith, then there won't be a strike. But we're dealing with an employer in the form of government that has not negotiated in good faith. And we hope that certainly in this round, they will do so that workers don't have to feel like they've got to go back.
If they do you think there's a future still for bargaining council? Because it's not the first time I've heard a trade union, like yourselves and others that we've interviewed, who are saying it looks like this bargaining council thing, the government is not respecting it.
Well, if they continue to do that, then we are going to have real problems, because once you take out centralized bargaining, then you are basically opening the door to chaos. And this is why you've got to respect centralized bargaining. We've got a government that does not take this seriously. And until they do so, you're going to have flare-ups like what happened during the Nehawu strike, like what happened even with us during ESCOM. You're always going to have a reaction where workers... You must understand that workers are not robots. These are human beings. These are men and women, parents with children. They have responsibilities. For anybody to take such a decision as to embark on an unprotected strike that would most likely result in their dismissal, you must understand that that person has been pushed into a place of no return. Yeah. And this is why this government must take centralized bargaining seriously.
Yeah, demanding 10%, some people say it's too high. Government recently, I think it was Ino Kondongwana, the finance minister, presenting his budget, he said they've only set aside an increase of 4.7%. Now, the unions are demanding 10%. You know the economy is not growing. You, as a metal workers union, you know exactly what's happening, for example, in the manufacturing sector when it comes to challenges of the economy and jobs and all of that. Do you think it's reasonable, let me use that word broadly, for a union to remain intransigent around the 10%? Or there should be an openness to move lower?
Well, the purpose of bargaining and negotiating is so that we can all find a common ground that would... a compromise that would suit everyone. But you must be in the chamber in order to get to that point. If you're going to behave like this government has behaved, where you renege on agreements, where you impose conditions and you impose a wage, then unfortunately you're going to have very, very bad negotiations. And what government should really actually have done is actually approach workers in the public sector bargaining chamber, or way before the minister presented the budget speech, and state honestly what the situation is and find a compromise that would not result in workers feeling like they have to resort to strike action. Such things can be found, Bradan. But if you're going to be dismissive, insulting and rude, the way this government has treated workers in the way that they've engaged them, then unfortunately you are going to get a very, very a pushback from workers because frankly they've suffered a lot. They did not get an increase during the worst time, which was COVID. They got no increase, and yet they were working overtime. If you're talking about health workers, they were working overtime with no PPE. So no increase in 2020, again no increase in the first year, just an imposition of 3%. It's quite disgusting, frankly, how the minister in the public sector has conducted himself when it comes to these talks.
Thank you very much. Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, speaking on behalf of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, Numsa. which has issued a very hard-hitting statement in the last 24 hours in solidarity with the public service worker strike, which is still ongoing with non-essential staff members, because a court yesterday ordered the essential workers described as essential to go back to their posts. Well, shortly here